Rockets fans, welcome to the channel here at Utility Sports, and today's video is dedicated to you guys for the Houston Rockets with an off-season preview. It was a long season for Houston, but I do think there were a lot of bright spots to take away, and if you are excited about this off-season and specifically the direction of the Houston Rockets, make sure to leave a like on today's video and also subscribe to the channel. That would be greatly appreciated. We pushed up over 8,000 subs and we want to keep growing. We would love to have you be a part of what we do here at Utility Sports. A ton of NBA mock drafts, NBA draft big boards, NBA draft player evaluations, scouting reports, everything you need about the NBA draft, NBA season, NBA playoffs, everything you want and more is here at Utility Sports. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, let's jump into this Rockets offseason preview. Starting with the video preview, what we're going to talk about in today's video, we're going to start off with the conclusion of the 2021-2022 NBA season, exactly how it went for Houston, some of my takeaways, my bright spots for the team, and of course the team record. We're going to talk about some key decisions that Rafael Stone, the GM of the Houston Rockets, needs to make. NBA draft picks, which assets they actually have before the lottery, which we'll talk about, and then also some draft targets I could see Houston really, zeroing in on and what needs that they could fill with those draft picks. Key players heading toward free agency, NBA free agency itself, where the Rockets sit with cap space, which is an interesting discussion to be had, and then also some potential targets. And then my season prediction for next year based on what I think realistically could happen for Houston this offseason. Of course, so much can change, which is why you do need to be subscribed, because we're going to be covering everything throughout the NBA offseason. Let's go ahead and jump forward here into the 2021-2022 season. Let's look back at it here with a record of 20-62, which was the worst record in the NBA. But there are a lot of bright spots here. And we're going to talk about why this record was the way it was. And I'm not actually that concerned about Houston. They have all of Brooklyn's picks basically coming up in the future. And they had some really, really great progression throughout the season, starting with the young backcourt of Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. Let's start with Kevin Porter Jr. because I think he had the toughest task coming into the season. He's been a shooting guard his whole life with creation elements to him where he could create for others and for himself, but never was asked and tasked with the opportunity of doing it for an entire game, for a franchise, for all season long. This was the first year he did it. And we saw a lot of struggles early, but about a month or so before the All-Star break, we really saw him kick it into gear, and we saw a lot of progression from him. So I want to commend Kevin Porter Jr. on that. He had a very tough assignment, one of the toughest across the entire league this season, and he handled it well, grew every single month, and has gotten a lot better in that role to the point where I could see him playing point guard moving forward. And then Jalen Green here as well. This is the player we really need to talk about. They took him second overall last season. He was number 2 on my big board last year. I thought that selection was very worthy at that time. And of course, he struggled out of the gate. Let's be honest about it. He was shooting inefficiently. The Rockets were really terrible at the start of the season. But he came into his own and became what everyone thought he could be, which is a scoring machine. His athleticism is incredible. And the last 10 games of the season really showcased what he could be. In 36 minutes a night, the last 10 games of the year, he was averaging 26 points a game on 47% shooting from the field, and 41% shooting from three. He was highly efficient down the stretch of the season. And I think he's a player who has some seriously long-term high upside. And I think he's a player that, if you're Houston and you're a Rockets fan, you have to be excited about this kid. Leave a like on the video if you are, because I want to see exactly how much Rockets fans believe in this young kid, because I think Jalen Green, his track record from where he went from the G League, playing rather inefficiently, to coming into Houston and starting the year inefficiently, I think it really raised some eyebrows for a lot of people. And I think everyone was a little concerned. But, as the season went on, he got better. And this is what you're asking for from a 19-year-old. Part of why Houston was so bad this season is they're playing a whole bunch of 19-year-olds. If you're playing a bunch of players who are under 22 years old, you're probably not going to be a good team in the NBA. That's just the reality of the league. But Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., those two specifically, took massive steps forward this season. I want to commend Rafael Stone as well for the deal for Kevin Porter Jr. I mean, they absolutely swindled Cleveland on that. And I think that it's very, very essential here that Houston continues to build around these two young guards. Alperen Şengün, I loved him last mock draft process. I talked very highly on him. I thought he could be a top 10 player in the class, and he looked that part. In 20 plus minutes a game this year, averaged about 10 points a game and shot fairly well from the field. And then one thing for him is he has a real knack for the basketball when he's rebounding. He's a very good rebounder, and I think it's something that Houston needed. They still were not a good rebounding team this season, and I think part of that's because they didn't have a lot of rebounding capability around Şengün. But with Şengün on the floor, I do feel really confident in the skill level of this team. You look at the trio here of KPJ, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün. I do really like that moving forward for Houston. So I do want to comment on Şengün's rookie season. And I also want to talk about Josh Christopher. I know he's not pictured on the screen here, and his name's not on the screen, but I do think he had a really nice rookie season as well. I love that selection. It's interesting because Houston's got a bevy of guards now. I'm interested to see how they go about building this roster up moving forward, but we'll talk about more of that when it comes to free agency and the draft. Jae'Sean Tate, his consistency and his contract, two of the best things in the NBA right now. Very cheap and affordable contract. He is a little bit older than the rest of these guys. He's around 26 years old, but pulling him over from the NBL the way that they did, really good move again by Rafael Stone. And again, this Rockets front office does deserve credit for him. His consistency has been very similar from where he was last year to this year. Again, didn't really take a step forward, but didn't take a step backward, which I was a little worried about because you never really know with a player like him coming over. It's not very often we get a guy near his mid-20s coming in as a rookie from the NBL. That's just not really ever happened before, but he has cemented himself as an NBA contributor. They've had him starting. I don't know if he's a starting level player, but ultimately this Rockets team, they just need to build up more depth. And then KJ Martin as well deserves a lot of credit. This guy's a walking highlight reel like his father was, but I also seen a lot of progression from him in terms of his actual skill set. He's not just postering guys anymore. He's actually got a little bit in his bag, and I think KJ Martin's going to be an instrumental piece in this long-term Rockets rebuild. And I think, given where they were at, 18 months ago before they traded James Harden with John Wall, there are some issues here with what this team had, in terms of what their actual roster looked like. The John Wall trade doesn't look good, but ultimately the Rockets, I think, are in a pretty good spot going forward. And we're going to talk about how they continue to keep some of their flexibility here at this point. And that's decision-making time for Rafael Stone. And he's had to make a lot of decisions since becoming the GM there in Houston. One, Christian Wood, he's making $14.5 million. I said it when they signed him, and I'm going to say it now. This was a phenomenal signing, but I think they could really look to trade him. $14.5 million. That's not a lot for him for what he's giving them on the floor. He's a player that's averaging around 18 points a game since coming to Houston. He's also, this past season, shot about 40% from three on almost 5 attempts a game. So he's been really awesome for Houston. I just think that they could probably maximize his value here, bring in some good draft assets for a team looking to add a 4 or 5 like Wood. And it pains me to say, because I really liked Christian Wood. I thought he was a phenomenal signing from Detroit when the Pistons let him go. And I thought Houston did a really good job signing him. But if you're trying to reset where your timetable's at, he's going to be 27 this next season. And the rest of your guys are around 21, 22. You might want to restructure that and try and build around him via trade. Get some younger pieces in, get some more draft picks and draft capital. Gives yourself more draft flexibility moving forward with the Nets picks, your own picks as well. So they've got some flexibility to move forward. Eric Gordon as well. I was surprised they didn't trade him this deadline. I thought he was going to end up as a Los Angeles Laker. Ultimately, no move happened. But I think Eric Gordon has to be on the way out, just given where his contract's at, $19.5 million. For a team that's not winning a ton of games, Eric Gordon had a good year this past year, and I think they should try and maximize his value as well here. Not that Eric Gordon can't help this team win games, but I just think ultimately, given his age, given where he's at in his career, he probably would like to be on a team that's winning a little bit more. And I also think that Rafael Stone would like to bring in more assets. John Wall, $47.36 million. This is going to be the final year of his contract. And ultimately, there's no trade here for John Wall unless it's for Russell Westbrook. And if they can find a way to get Russell Westbrook back and bring in a draft pick to do it, that's an instant A+ move to me. And if Rafael Stone's able to pull that off, he maybe wins GM of the year in my book for a player that's not playing for them. But ultimately, I would expect John Wall to be on the roster next season. I just don't know if I see an actual trade there. Maybe Russ gets scapegoated again in LA, but ultimately at this point, I expect John Wall to stay with Houston. Moving on to their NBA draft selections. and they do have 2 picks this year in the first round. They have their own 2022 first round pick, which is going to be dependent on the lottery. I have an NBA draft lottery video up on the channel explaining how the draft lottery works, and it also specifically goes in detail about the Houston Rockets odds in this year's draft. So if you do want to check that out, there will be a card for that here. I highly recommend it. It goes into very good depth about how the draft lottery works, the whole overall process. So if you're curious, go check that out after this video. And then they also have the Brooklyn Nets first round pick. So they have 2 picks in the top 18 that are going to be very, very beneficial in building up this team. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. When you think about ways that this team can improve, it's got to be on the defensive side of the ball. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the Rockets statistics. They gave up the highest field goal percentage within 5 feet of the rim, which means they're badly in need of more rim protection, which is why I think Christian Wood could go out and you bring in more of a rim protecting defensive-minded center next to Şengün, or a defensive-minded 4. For that matter, it doesn't necessarily have to be a center. It just has to be someone who can play around the rim defensively. And then you also have to look at a team, at a player here in the draft probably that could help you just get better defensively on the perimeter as well. And I think Jae'Sean Tate moves probably to the bench and comes off the bench in the future, which I think is a really good role for him. I mean, he's played well as a starter, but I think he's more suited as a, 6th or 7th man type of guy there in Houston. Also, I think Garrison Matthews was a good find for this team with his defensive intensity. But realistically, when you look at Houston, they gave up the most points in the league this past year, almost 119 points a game. That's just not going to get the job done in the NBA. You can't do that. I think the next closest team was at 117. So they're giving up 2 points a game more than any other team in the league. You're not going to win like that, even when Jalen Green's popping off for 30. You need to have a better defensive system. And I think Steven Silas, he hasn't had defensive players there with him. And I'm very aware of what he is as a coach. And I think there's also a need to get more pick and roll screeners there. They actually rank in the bottom 5 in screen assists in the NBA, which, maybe a lot of people aren't tracking screen assists and, really the importance of that. But for Steven Silas, who's a pick and roll heavy point guard, you need to get some guys who are good at picking and rolling. And right now, Houston just doesn't have a lot of that. So I think there's pretty obvious some players here that could help this team. And here's the draft targets here for their own draft pick, which again, could be as high as pick 1, but could be as low as pick 5. So in that range, these are the 5 guys I think that they would consider. These are the top 5 players in the class in my own draft board evaluation, which I spend hundreds of hours doing every single year. Jabari Smith, forward out of Auburn. I think he's probably going to be one of the fan favorites here for Houston. I think a lot of Houston fans are going to be wanting Jabari Smith. Paolo Banchero, they will also consider. He's a 6'10" power forward, pretty good interior defensive capabilities. Not the best on the perimeter defensively, though, kind of lacks quickness. Jaden Ivey, they will consider him specifically because I think he could be the best player in this year's class when it's all said and done. I talked about Kevin Porter Jr.'s improvement as a point guard. Jaden Ivey, just quite frankly, is a better point guard, though. So if you wanted to, you could play a little smaller, even though I don't think that's the most beneficial thing for Houston. I don't think they'll take Jaden Ivey, but ultimately, if you think Jaden Ivey is the best player in the class, you should probably just take him. And then Chet Holmgren here as well. Ultimately, for me, this is the player I think Houston needs the most. And I know Rockets fans might moan and groan and when they hear that and say, oh, we don't want Chet Holmgren. He's 190 pounds. He could fit really well next to Şengün. Şengün plays fairly physically. He deals with contact well. And Chet Holmgren, he adds that length, dynamic, rim protecting element that this Houston Rockets defense is extremely lacking. Holmgren's versatile enough to switch out onto the perimeter. I do have a scouting profile video on the channel of Chet Holmgren. It's about 22 minutes long and goes into really good depth about what Chet Holmgren can be as a player. I specifically mentioned Houston in that video as well because I think that they are the perfect landing spot for Chet because he's not going to be the offensive go-to player like a Jabari Smith or a Paolo Banchero or Jaden Ivey, but he's the perfect glue guy in here. If you're Houston, you don't need an offensive go-to. You have Jalen Green. You also have Kevin Porter Jr. Şengün can score offensively. You need the perfect connector. And to me, Chet Holmgren is that because of how well he can defend. He's also very good in drop defense situations. So I think all in all, he's going to help this team rebound more efficiently. He's going to help this team shoot the ball more efficiently because he shot 39% from 3 this past year for Gonzaga. He's very skill oriented, but he's also very smart defensively when it comes to positioning, IQ, very good recovery time. And I think Houston here probably is most benefited in terms of the win column by drafting Chet Holmgren. But I also could really see the Jabari Smith train making a lot of sense as well because he can also protect the rim to a certain extent, and he's also got really good length on the perimeter. So for me, if I'm Houston, I think the top two guys I would be targeting, if I'm just drafting solely based on the roster I currently have and not based on my own evaluation of who the best player is, I would look at Chet Holmgren and Jabari Smith 1-2. You could argue either order there. I think either is fair. Rockets fans, let me know in the comment section, who would you prefer, Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren? Let me know. I have a feeling it's going to be Jabari Smith, but maybe I'll be surprised if it's Chet Holmgren. Let me know. Going forward into other NBA draft targets that they could look at with the Brooklyn pick, and this is, remember, going to be probably around pick 16 to 18-ish. And here they could target someone like Ochai Agbaji from Kansas. Now, I know a lot of people think he could go in the lottery, which is possible, but you never know. Maybe he'll be available there at 16. Jeremy Sohan from Baylor. I think this one's the one that makes the most sense. He is a very versatile defensive player for the Baylor Bears. Head coach there, Scott Drew, really relied on him as a freshman to guard multiple positions. A lot of times he was guarding centers and then occasionally would switch out onto point guards. It's very rare that you have a player that can do that. Chet Holmgren, I talked about how special he is defensively. Jeremy Sohan might be the best defensive player in this class. So if you're Houston and you're Rafael Stone and you say, wow, our defense was absolutely horrendous this past year, and you go into this draft adding either Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren and then Jeremy Sohan to top it off, I mean, you might go from one of the worst defenses ever to arguably a middle of the road defense rather quickly, just with 2 additions. That could be really massive for Houston here in kind of moving the needle and really repositioning where this team's at. Hugo Bassan, I also have him on here from New Zealand. He plays for the New Zealand Breakers. Really great 3-point shooter. If you're looking for a little bit more bench shooting punch, I think that Hugo Bassan would be a really good addition, although I don't think it's necessarily the best fit. Simply because they have more guards already. EJ Liddell, very similar to Sohan. He's very flexible defensively. One of the best rim protectors in the nation this year, despite being a forward and not actually a big man for Ohio State. He protected the rim at an elite level. Kind of reminds me of Draymond Green. Now, I don't think he's going to be the passer Draymond Green is, but he was averaging 3 blocks a game for the Buckeyes, and he stands shorter than 6'8". So the comparison there probably makes sense to you guys once I say that. Kendall Brown, Nikola Jovic, these two kind of fill the same role here for me. Kendall Brown was actually Jeremy Sohan's teammate at Baylor, and Nikola Jovic is a Serbian-born player. And both of them are wings who have multidimensionality to them. Both of them can dribble the basketball, can attack closeouts, can make the extra pass. I think Jovic is a little bit further in his development. I think he's a little bit more skilled, whereas Kendall Brown may be a little bit more athletic. So it depends on what you're looking for here. If you're Houston, again, athleticism and length is huge for this team. They didn't deflect a lot of passes. They didn't get a lot of block shots at the rim. And I think if you can go out in these first picks in the first round and you can address some of the absences on your team and some of the needs, I think Houston could be actually pretty solid next season. Moving forward into key players headed toward free agency, and it's guard Dennis Schroeder, who they acquired from Boston, and then also center Bruno Fernando. So again, I have, it says key players. It's not like these losses are really traumatic for this team. I think they would like to probably keep Dennis Schroeder around, especially if they still have John Wall and they don't want to play him. Then Schroeder makes sense. Bruno Fernando, when I evaluated him out of Maryland, I thought he could be a pretty solid rim protecting center. Just hasn't really stuck in the NBA. If they lose him, again, that's not a big deal. And I mean, even if they do lose Schroeder, I don't think it's the end of the world either. I think Kevin Porter Jr. is going to take another step forward this next season and be a better point guard again moving forward. So NBA free agency, where does this leave them? Well, actually, the Rockets are projected to be $11 million over the salary cap at the time I record this, which means they only really have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception at their disposal, and veteran minimums is what they can sign. They still do have flexibility to open up that cap space, though, with the players we talked about earlier. Say they find a way to trade Christian Wood to a team with cap space, say Orlando or Oklahoma City or San Antonio, potentially, who could be looking for a 4. Then at this point, you could open up $14.5 million and you'd actually be under the salary cap again, but only by about $3 million. Now, let's say you find a way to also trade Eric Gordon this offseason, whether that's, to a team like Los Angeles, or you maybe trade him to another team that's contending or a team that wants to take a step forward. If you trade both Christian Wood and Eric Gordon, you open up $33 million in cap space, which would actually put you at about $22 million in cap space, depending on their holds. So even without trading John Wall, they could have practical cap space to use. not a ton of it. And the thing is, if you're going to trade Christian Wood and Eric Gordon, you want to do it for value. You don't want to just do it to get off those contracts because they're not terrible contracts. Specifically, the Christian Wood one's a great contract in my mind. So here with Wood and Gordon, they have flexibility, but as of right now, they are slotted to only have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to use. So potential free agent targets with that non-taxpayer mid-level, and we're going to talk about those separately here. So here's all the free agent targets I think could make sense for Houston, but specifically if I'm looking for guys for the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, Jalen Smith would fit into that from Indiana. Kevon Looney would fit into that from Golden State, or you could combine that into, a combination of something like Yuta Watanabe and Ishmael Wainwright, Toronto and Phoenix forwards. I think those two could make some sense. They're both younger. Watanabe, a very aggressive, competitive defender, most known for getting dunked on a bunch, but anyone who actually watches the Raptors knows that he is all in on trying his best to protect the rim, defend, he rotates, and plays with a lot of energy and effort. So I think he could actually be a nice acquisition for this Rockets team defensively. And then Ishmael Wainwright's a very skill-oriented player, and has, in limited minutes for Phoenix, actually left an impact. Now, both Watanabe and Wainwright are restricted, so if you send them both $5 million offer sheets, my guess is Toronto and Phoenix probably would match those, but it could be a potential way to find at least one role player if, say, a team doesn't match them. If Phoenix or Toronto did let them go, Gorgui Dieng would be a veteran minimum type player that you could bring in. He offers some size, and he can also shoot the ball with a little bit of regularity. He's not a great player by any stretch. I'm not saying that it's going to move the needle for Houston, but it does give you a veteran who can come off the bench and play. Then you see the big name there at the top, DeAndre Ayton. And let's say they do open up about $22 million in cap space. They could probably try and find a way to make another move here, clear up a little bit more, and maybe go into the offseason and offer DeAndre Ayton a 4-year, $100 million offer sheet, which puts a lot of pressure on Phoenix, who is in your conference. We've seen this in the past. Think about when the Brooklyn Nets offered, I think, a 4-year, $64 million offer sheet for guard Tyler Johnson from the Miami Heat. The Heat felt pressure to match it. They did. And $60 million was an overpay for Tyler Johnson. Now, you might be saying, well, DeAndre Ayton's worth a max. I don't know about that, specifically because you think about what Chris Paul does with bigs. He makes bigs play at a really high level, and there's no denying that DeAndre Ayton has played at a high level. But when you consider where Phoenix is at, they've already paid Mikal Bridges. They got CP3 locked up. Devin Booker's locked up. Cam Johnson's going to want a nice new contract. And the play of, Bismack Biyombo, JaVale McGee, I think makes DeAndre Ayton a little less certain to be worthy of a max type contract. And Phoenix didn't offer Ayton a max contract when he was contract extension eligible this past offseason. So I think they're going to be waiting to see how this, playoffs play out for DeAndre Ayton to see if he is worth that max contract or not. But I think Houston here, this is an opportunity to get a rim protecting center to hold down your defense and really improve your team if you do find ways out of the Christian Wood and also Eric Gordon contract that makes sense, or if you also find a way to maybe get off of John Wall in some bizarre, crazy turn of events that I'm not expecting. DeAndre Ayton would make this Rockets team better and would also put a lot of pressure on a team in your conference to at least maybe match that offer sheet or to let him go to a team in conference. So I think Ayton, a very intriguing pickup for whichever team tries to offer him an offer sheet this offseason. Moving forward here now into next season. After the draft and after some free agent targets, I think that the Rockets could take a big step forward. Remember, they were the worst team in the league this past year, and I expect them to be maybe 11th to 13th in the Western Conference next year, which is a massive step forward. It really is. To move up 3 to 4 spots in your own conference, that is very tough to do. So I don't want it to seem like I'm short selling Houston. I think there's a lot of development going on here. I think the Rockets are getting better day by day. And I think this offseason is another really good opportunity for Rafael Stone to, cash in on some assets and really try and improve this team. So I think they're going to be better. For me, I hope they take Holmgren or Jabari Smith, and I think that does really help this team. My expected number of wins is between 28 and 35. Remember, they just went 20 and 62, so I'm projecting about 8 to 15 win improvement for Houston. That is massive, nearly double on the back end there. If they get 35 wins, they nearly doubled their winning total from this past season. And when you see Jalen Green the way he's been playing, I think if he takes a step forward again, That's going to be huge for them. The addition of Jabari Smith and or Chet Holmgren could be huge. Like, you're looking at massive improvement here internally from Houston. I think that they're in a really good spot. Rockets fans, you should be excited about the future here in Houston. If you are, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. And again, I just want to thank you so much for watching. You guys are all so really awesome. We really do appreciate all the support we get on the channel here. Rockets fans, I'm wishing the best for you. I'm hoping Rafael Stone can cash in on these assets that he's got moving forward. And I'm hoping this offseason plays out well for you. Let me know in the comment section again, who do you want, Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren? And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.